Very shortly after I set up the Sutton Trust in 1997, David became Shadow Education Secretary. And, you know, we had 2 or 3 conversations around that time. David has been a Treasury official. He's been a member of the Number 10 Policy Unit. He's been the Member of Parliament for Havant since 1992 and Paymaster General in the Major Government. And he told me this at dinner last night, I hope I've got it right, but he is the only minister from the Major Government who has been a shadow minister throughout the Labour years and is now a minister in the coalition government. Isn't that?
I think so.
I think that's
I lost my
amazing.
hair in the process.
I know.
Yes.
I was going to say, despite a very rocky ride on grammar schools in the middle, you've shown your durability, I think, David. It's really quite impressive. David is probably, I would say, our most thoughtful politician. We can decide how much competition there is there, but I think it's true to say David is the most thoughtful politician we have. His best-known book is entitled The Pinch and has the subtitle, How the Baby Boomers Took Their Children's Future and Why They Should Give It Back. So, as I've discussed with David on a number of occasions, I totally agree with him. David has written an excellent piece in the Telegraph this morning encouraging British students to study in the United States. And I'm going to quote from that. I hope I'm not stealing your thunder here, but first of all, David said, the American model of a broad liberal arts education with no rush to specialise too soon has much to commend it. And this is one competitive pressure that UK universities would do well to respond to. And then another quote, this is exactly the sort of broad experience that this government is keen to encourage. In a globalised world, it is as foolish to be parochial about higher education, to desperately cling on to every clever student as proof of our excellence, as it is to be insular on university research. So, of course, this is exactly what we are trying to do with our summer schools at Harvard, MIT and Yale. And not just 175 kids that go there, but we're trying to light a beacon for other bright state school kids to say, you know, consider studying the United States. We've identified 250 American universities and colleges with significant money available for undergraduates, totaling $600 million a year. So there's a lot of opportunity there, not just at, you know, Harvard and MIT, but at a lot of really great liberal arts colleges, etc., and state universities. David, I know, is a strong believer in widening participation and improving access, so David, over to you.
I will use this, but there's 2 slides. We'll get to them. When we get to them, we will work out which button I should press. Well, it's great to be here. Thank you, Peter, for that introduction. And I've got a speech which as I've read the papers for your excellent conference, I've got more and more excited, and the speech has grown and grown and grown. But then I'm going to deliver the full speech, but it'll be available for the people who really want to follow it. But I'm here above all because of the debt that I have to the Sutton Trust, and particularly these Anglo-American social mobility summits, which I think I went to the first of them out in New York.
You did.
And and I remember that. I think I've been trying to participate in every one of them in some way or other, and we have a great debt both to the Sutton Trust and to Peter in particular for what you do on social mobility. Between you and John Major are the 2 people who keep it in the headlines, Peter. And thank you very much for that. And of course, the Sutton Trust is not just a think tank, it's a do tank, and the work that you do in toolkits for helping for schools with toolkit and the similar toolkit for access teams and universities is very valuable. This conference is about Anglo-American comparisons, and that's a fascinating and important subject. Let me start with a British perspective. And for us, we've just been marking the 50th anniversary of Robbins, and his crucial principle stands today as it did when he formulated it in his document published in October 1963. Courses of higher education should be available for all those who are qualified by ability and attainment to pursue them and who wish to do so. And that proposition led him to argue for the expansion of universities. I marked the anniversary with a pamphlet for the Social Market Foundation. I think we put a few copies outside, in which I showed that this process of expansion is not over, and we can expect further expansion of universities. Robbins explicitly rejected arguments based on detailed forecasts of labour markets. Instead, he argued that more young people would be leaving school with the educational attainments that would justify their going to university. And I believe that argument still holds. If you take, for example, one of his ways of constructing that, what would happen if people from poor backgrounds went to university at the same rate as people from affluent backgrounds already do? Well, I go through the calculations in the pamphlet. In 2011, there was 368,000 new students entering higher education in this country, but there are enormous gaps in participation. Taking two examples at random to show the gap between the richest and less affluent parts of the country. In Vince's constituency of Twickenham, my friend and colleague Vince, 62% of young people make it into higher education, one of the highest percentages anywhere in the country. So from that perspective, it looks as if you've already got a lot of people going to university. Why on earth should you have more? In my much less privileged constituency of Havant, 23% of young people go to university. Just imagine the dream, and imagine that people in Havant went to university in the same proportion as in Twickenham. If everyone did that, and you add some allow for demographic change as well, by 2035, instead of 368,000 new students, we'll be looking at 620,000 entrants. So that is the challenge. Now, I then think, how would I win an argument to provide opportunities for more people from Havant to go to university? To narrow that gap between the places where 2/3 of young people go and the places where 1/5 go. My view is that we will not win it if numbers are tight and it is a zero-sum game. If I can only have one more person from Havant going at the cost of someone from Twickenham. That's why expansion is still on the table as part of meeting the social mobility challenge. The fear has always been that, in the words of Kingsley Amis, more means worse. But so far, empirical evidence has proved him wrong. Even as more and more people have gone to university, average returns both to them and to the economy have not fallen. Of course, there are individuals for whom it doesn't work out, but overall, higher education delivers big returns for the individual, the economy, and society. And indeed, we recently produced an analysis, which I hope, if I'm going to... There we are. This, which I'm not going to have time to go through, but I'm rather proud of this quadrant because there's such a debate where you get bogged down in what's the value of university? Are you just an instrumentalist only focused on the economics? I described this when I first launched it as my peace offering to Stefan Collini, who is a person who thinks that it's all just inherently worthwhile. It tries to just get our arguments clear. There are economic benefits, market benefits, and non-market benefits. And there are also collective benefits, and there are individual benefits. Each one of those quadrants is full of evidence about actual ways in which... So there are economic returns to the individual. But if you say there are economic returns to the individual, which is the bottom right-hand corner, it doesn't mean that you're denying that there are also non-market returns, including collective non-market returns, which is the top left-hand corner. Things like the social capital. So each one of these quadrants has got in it evidence about the case for higher education. And incidentally, each one of those propositions is not a kind of nice thought that I've had as a politician. Each one of those specific assertions rests on excellent British social science. And we've now got on our website, if you click on any one of those assertions, you will find a reference to an academic journal article which sustains the claim. So those are the benefits of going to higher education, which we set out the other week on the Robbins 50th anniversary. And that's why we can, in the long run, not even be in the next year or two, that we can, I'm sure, expect continuing growth. The challenge is how to pay for it, how to make it affordable. Robbins came to wish that he had proposed a particular model of paying for higher education, which he called the Prest scheme, because it was initially proposed by Professor Prest. It was considered in the Robbins report. It was basically a graduate repayment scheme. The student did not pay, but when a graduate earns enough, they start paying back as a proportion of their earnings. It took 40 years, but eventually such a system was introduced by the last Labour government, and we have taken it further. The student does not pay up front, so you're not in the terrible position of not being able to afford to go to university. The graduate repays, but, and this is crucial, on an income contingent basis. It's not like a commercial loan, it's not a mortgage-style payment, it's essentially a graduate tax with repayments linked to the actual cost of your university education. That is what makes it fair and progressive. Now, I know that there's still more to do and that there are challenges in areas like part-time students and postgraduate master's courses. There are real policy challenges here. But in both these cases, there is not a universal loan scheme of the sort we have for undergraduates. So the problem is not our loan scheme. The problem is the lack of a scheme or any other alternative way forward in these areas. The concept of the income contingent loan as a progressive tool is not an alien one in the US. Warren Buffett famously told students at Columbia Business School, I think he was speaking at their graduation day, right now I'd pay $100,000 for 10% of the future earnings of any of you, which was his attempt at personally constructing one of these schemes. I don't know if he had any takers. Yale actually experimented with a scheme in which students pledged that for every $1,000 they borrowed from the university, they would repay a small percentage of future earnings for 35 years or until the whole cohort paid off its debt. This scheme had good intentions. Yale wanted to increase its number of public school students, but the anger of the many graduates who ended up paying for far longer than they anticipated reminds us of the importance of designing your scheme properly. For me, having written a book on the subject, and thank you very much, Peter, for what you said, a book on the subject of intergenerational exchanges, the problem with the Yale program was clear. All the costs were met within the cohort and other members paid more when some couldn't pay back. That is not how our scheme is constructed. Our RAB charge, the portion of student loans we predict we will have to write off, is a deliberate and important part of our policy and is financed by the generality of taxpayers. If you graduate and have low earnings, we don't expect you to pay back. Our repayments, mostly via the income tax system, are not onerous. It is an extra 9% tax on earnings above a £21,000 threshold. If ever your income falls below £21,000, you stop paying back. Indeed, we estimate about 35 to 40% of the loans may not be paid back, as people on lower lifetime earnings will not pay off the whole of their loans. If you're earning the median wage, which is now £26,500, your repayments come in at £41 a month. Parents who worry that their children are going to be saddled with unaffordable repayment themselves probably entered the jobs market when the basic rate of income tax was higher than the 29% that their graduate sons and daughters are likely to face. This is all very different from the American system. Indeed, when I was in California last year, students at the University of California were campaigning for income contingent loans to help poorer students. They clearly saw that the system that we have adopted was a progressive and radical option. Now, at the same time that Robbins was shaping British higher education, Clark Kerr was transforming the system in California. His lectures, The Uses of the University, were first published in 1963. He updated his book with regular updates from the front line every decade or so, and it's a fascinating account of what he called the multiversity. And he provides a basis for a useful comparison because of the Californian system. But let me remind you again, the American system is very different from what we have to offer here. There, paying for your degree is much closer to taking out a credit card debt. There is no equivalent to our maintenance support for students, though some institutions with substantial endowments do provide poor students with full scholarships. And I have to say, I think our system is a superior model. It gets the principle right. If you do well, you pay back, but you don't pay back if you don't do as well. And it imposes lower costs on students and graduates than the US model. Saying that a Brit might be able to get a scholarship at Harvard or Stanford, and good luck to him or her, excellent, completely up for that, is not the same as saying that American higher education as a whole is more progressive. We have to compare like with like and look at our national system against their state or national system. I must say I was surprised when I read Dr. Jerem's paper on family background and access to higher status in universities, commissioned by the Sutton Trust for this conference. The most generous interpretation I can put on it is that he wanted our American friends to feel at home by making our system feel far more like the American one than it really is. But actually, it is very different. His paper focuses on high-status institutions, but let's remind ourselves that is a small group, not a snapshot of the system as a whole. If we take the Ivy League as an example, their combined total undergraduate cohort is 65,000 students out of a total of 11 million in full-time higher education in the US. And as Dr. Jerem's paper acknowledges, even with these big bursaries, elite universities in the US have exactly the same issue as those in the UK. Just one graduate in 20 comes from a poorer home. They have America's system means that if you do have upfront fees, yes, you need a means test to exempt poor students from them. But we need no such means test as they are not paying in the first place in Britain. At the elite private colleges in the US, large endowments mean generous aid packages. So the actual cost for students from low-income backgrounds is a fraction of the intimidating sticker price. Again, good thing. But the number of students that aid actually reaches is very limited. In contrast, our loans are available to all eligible first-time students, regardless of where they are studying. Indeed, in the UK, only 6% of students don't have any public financial assistance. In the US, a quarter of students don't. And on top of our loan scheme, last year, the UK government spent £1.5 billion on maintenance grants for students from lower-income families. I have to say that Dr. Jerem's paper manages to conceal these crucial differences in one of the more peculiar analyses of our system that I've come across. He carefully defines what he calls the sticker price as the cost of tuition, accommodation, food, and other direct costs before any non-repayable financial support is taken into account. His measure ignores the single most important feature of our system, that is a progressive graduate repayment system. Although he acknowledges this problem at the end of his paper, for the most part, he treats a fee you do not pay up front as identical as a fee that you would pay up front. If we got rid of our graduate repayment system and actually charged fees to students up front, everyone in higher education would recognise that something had profoundly changed, but I'm not clear on Dr. Jerem's measure where he would observe any change in his definition of the sticker price. Now, his argument is linked to Peter's long-standing fear that somehow our reforms mean poor people cannot afford to go to university. I have great respect for Peter. I do have great respect for Peter. On this, he is plain wrong, and wrong on 3 counts. First, he is wrong in theory because poor students don't pay. Students do not pay up front. It is a graduate repayment scheme. He's wrong in practice too. We've just had a record percentage of students from low-income families apply for university. A decade ago, before the original Blair changes, 10% of young people from the poorest quintile applied for university. This is now up to 20%. Not good enough, but a doubling in the decade during which time this graduate repayment model has been in force. The percentage of 18-year-olds, let me give you the exact figures for this year under our system, with the 9,000 student fees not payable by students but repaid. From the most disadvantaged, the percentage of 18-year-olds from the most disadvantaged quintile applying from England has now risen to 19.8%, the highest rate on record. We must continue to monitor it, but it does look as if young people from all backgrounds understand the system and are not put off from applying. This is a stark reminder, incidentally, of why we need an affordable system of HE with potential for growth. Those who say, let's get rid of fees, actually put a major obstacle in the way of social mobility because the cost of educating each graduate rises, so there will be greater controls on student numbers, which is bad for social mobility. I have to say that, thirdly, Peter's approach is wrong in principle as well. Because what we're talking about is repayment by graduates, when what matters then are your circumstances as an adult. If you end up in a low-paid job, you do not pay back. But Peter appears to believe that your graduate repayment should be determined by your family circumstances when you were a student. But that would be stretching the concept of social justice to breaking point. It doesn't make sense for 2 graduates to be working side by side in identical well-paid jobs, but with one facing an income tax rate 9% lower than the other because he or she came from a poorer family. By that point, it really shouldn't matter where you came from. Now, the So far, I've focused on how to finance higher education so that we ensure maximum opportunities for young people, especially from poor backgrounds. This is the argument for wider participation. But we should not ignore the challenge of access, which the Sutton Trust has rightly drawn attention to. And indeed, Dr. Jeremy, I'm now going to try to make peace with Peter and Dr. Jeremy, having got that in the system, shows that in England, children of professionals are 3 times more likely to go to a Russell Group university. But nearly a third of this difference can't be put down to differences in academic achievement. And there are similar points in the US. Now, this is the argument, and I recognise it, that our most prestigious universities matter most, especially for future jobs, and young people from poorer backgrounds are missing out on them. This is what the Sutton Trust has eloquently warned of as the missing 3,000. I fully understand this argument, but I have to say, even here, there are 3 pieces of uncomfortable evidence that we do need to engage with. First, young people may have reached a rather more considered view of what they do than we always recognise. It is incorrect just to assume every person from a low-income background who doesn't apply for a Russell Group has just made a terrible mistake based on ignorance. Last year, research published by the Sutton Trust and my department explored the decision-making of high-achieving applicants. It found that some of those bright, poorer students who don't apply, some, to the most prestigious institutions, do actually have a proper understanding of their options and are happy with their choice. They might be shrewd enough to know there are particular world-class courses leading to good jobs in our less prestigious universities. They may care more about staying near to home or about how employer-focused a course is than they care about an elite reputation. But nonetheless, and these are issues open for debate, I do recognise that there are also serious gaps in knowledge about the range of options available to some of these students, which we do need to tackle. Second challenge to the missing 3,000 view. There is some alternative evidence about the extra wage premium from our most prestigious universities. We published recently new independent research by Ian Walker and Yu Zhu, which on the impact of university degrees on lifetime earnings, and it did find a substantial graduate premium. For male students, 165,000, female students, 250,000. But once parental background and number of A-levels were taken into account, there was no evidence of an additional substantive premium for attending one of our most selective universities. Now, I know other studies have reached a different conclusion, so this isn't definitive, but it is interesting. Is there a genuine extra labour premium from going to our more prestigious universities not accounted for by family background and prior A-level attainment? Thirdly, the third question is the benefit that you get after you graduate varies according to background. So if you come from a less advantaged background, you do less well in the job market, even if you have gone to a more prestigious university. Research published by our Social Mobility and Child Poverty Commission last month showed that 3 years after graduation, individuals from higher socio-economic backgrounds were still more likely to be in a high-status occupation than those from less privileged backgrounds, even when they had gone to the same university. This persistent advantage for privately school-educated students is that elusive social capital that helps you walk confidently into a great job after university. This is another challenge that we need to tackle. And in January, I launched UpReach, a graduate scheme set up by a graduate Exeter University aimed to tackle this problem. But I think we can do more about it. And the Office for Fair Access acknowledged that helping students go on to successful careers is an important part of widening participation. They have confirmed that money pledged in access agreements can be spent on activities such as organising professional mentors to help students from low-income backgrounds or providing extra support for those students who are on work placements, and I will be discussing this further with Les Ebden. Finally, let me end with further reflection on the movement of students between Britain and America, sometimes described alarmingly as a, quote, brain drain because of fees. There is no evidence for this. Critics claim that students who choose to go to the US are somehow rejecting the British system or exposing its flaws. But I see such student exchange as entirely positive. It's not something we should be afraid of or embarrassed about. And, of course, for a start, students are travelling in both directions. This is a genuine exchange. And let me give you the data. Here are the data where the blue line is US students studying in the UK every year from 2001. And the red line is UK students studying in the US. You may observe that the number of US students coming to study in the UK is growing more rapidly than the number of UK students going to study in the US. I know that this is not how the Daily Telegraph will ever report this trend, but the fact is that here we have a two-way process, and I want to see more exchange in both directions. That chart does not tell me that Britain has a catastrophic problem because we have introduced income contingent repayments in the past 10 years. So, yes, we do need cooperation and we need exchange. Higher education is becoming more global, a good thing too. There will be student mobility in both directions. And I would like to acknowledge at this point the excellent cooperation I had with Martha Cantor in the first Obama administration. Her personal commitment ensured that federal loans for US students who wanted to study a higher education course at conservatoires in the UK were reinstated this spring. Now, if anything, our problem is that British students have typically displayed less enthusiasm to study abroad than we would like. And studying in another country forges networks and broadens opportunities. And I'm delighted to announce today that the British Council will manage around £800 million of European Commission money over the 7 years in the new Erasmus Plus European Student Exchange Programme. Under this exciting programme, which starts in January 2014, our students can apply to spend a year studying or training in any one of 33 participating countries, now including the US. Over 5 million people across Europe will benefit from this scheme, doubling the number in participating in the old scheme. And I look forward to more exchange students from other countries enriching our institutions, and I hope more British young people will seize this opportunity to broaden their horizons, brush up their language skills, and impress future employers. Now, what can we learn from the US comparison? When I look at the actual quotes of British students who've gone to study in the US, what I observe is that the reason students give for studying in the US, what comes top is the desire to study in more breadth. In fact, this is where Robbins was right, and we have failed to live up to his model of a broad liberal arts education, which of course excludes the sciences, with specialisation coming later. This is one competitive pressure that UK universities would do well to respond to. So I think we have much to learn from each other, Britain and America. Our universities can certainly learn from the model of the American liberal arts education. But when it comes to fair and progressive financing of higher education, I have to say that my view is the English model wins hands down. Thank you very much indeed.
David, I'm sure you're happy to take a few questions.
Yeah.
Obviously, I'm not going to rise to the bait because we'll be here all day. But David knows he and I don't totally agree on all this stuff. But just maybe I could just ask the first question, which is about the new announcement. Mm-hmm. Does that mean students who go on our summer schools, for instance, and go to American universities, can they access contingent loans in the States? I mean, the kind of loans they could get going to British universities. I mean, that would be...
Yes.
Because that would obviously widen the scope of universities to which they could go. Right now, they're confined to the... Well, not confined, but obviously they need 100% paid for because they're poor students, but they could go to places where they can get 70%, and if they could access a contingent loan, that would broaden this whole program in a huge way.
Let me check that out. I think they may need a parent UK institution sending them to study elsewhere, but I think it is... I'm keen to see if we can work with you to help make sure that if there's some way we can make sure that the EU rules under which we work and what you do in the Sutton Trust can be aligned so that it can help finance what you do. I'm up for that. We'd like to make that happen. We will follow that.
I will take some questions. Do you want to take three at a time?
Yeah.
Let's get 3 questions.
I'm afraid I've only got 10 minutes.
Okay, so let's just have 3 questions and see where we go.
You've got to let Dr. Jeremy.
Dr. Jeremy.
You've got to let Dr. Jeremy have a...
Luckily, I have about 10 questions, but I'm going to cut it down to 3.
Okay, 1, please, John.
Now I have to pick one. Okay, so in the report I've written, what was going through my head was how relevant are income contingent loans for these high flyers at these high status universities? Surely we think that they're going to be the ones who are earning high and so paying off all of their loans. And so this kind of cost comparison if it's going to be legitimate anywhere, surely it's these guys at these universities. It's to me, there doesn't seem to be such a big issue with that. I take your point about income contingency, but the point about income contingency is that it insures against risk of low income. These guys don't have so much that risk. These guys are earning high amounts post-graduation.
All right,
And if
I
the
think
Secretary
that's
of State-
enough. You can go on forever.
Good.
Let's take some other questions. Yeah. Other questions for David? Anyone else? There must be some more questions. That was. No, John. Come on, I want someone else other than Oliver.
Yeah, it's just related to that last point, which is surely the problem on the income contingent loans is that the interest element, which has been set at a very high level, is not progressive because it ensures that the richest pay less. Or, not the richest, those who earn the most pay less.
This is a 3% real interest rate he's talking about. Okay, another one. Another one. Here we go. Mike. Who's it, Mike? No? Okay.
I really just wanted to say to the Minister, thank
Penny.
you for...
Just say who you are. I'm sorry. you should do.
Penny Egan, Fulbright Commission. It's very nice to
Fulbright.
see those figures up there because much as we try at Fulbright to get the message across, the press never report the other side of the equation. So it's really nice to see you doing so. Thank you.
On Dr. James' case, and first of all, Dr. James, who got the ESRC kind of, I think I might even have written to you. I certainly remember at some ESRC events celebrating the fact you got a reward as one of their star social science researchers and done excellent work on PISA and other stuff, which I have read. On this, though, you now seem to be arguing, contrary to Peter. Peter's worry is that the poor kids are put off. Your worry is that the rich kids are put off by our scheme because they will be paying back. They work out that they are going to be earning more than £21,000 and therefore they will be hit by the repayment scheme. So the rich kids worry. That is why ours is not like Yale. Ours is linked to the cost of your higher education, so it isn't indefinite. And if you think I'm going to be a doctor or a partner in Goldman Sachs, to be honest, this 9% tax rate until you have paid for your cost of your higher education, I don't think is a barrier that would mean that it would put you off. And it relates to the 3% progressive rate. I mean, essentially, the panoply, you then need some formula to calculate what constitutes the cost of your higher education. Unless you'd have a kind of Yale model, or unless you just make it indefinite, which is the problem with a full-blown graduate tax. So you have to have a complicated structure that enables you to calculate the sum of money, which changes over time because there is a time cost to money. But all that is, we engage with all that. But getting caught up in those calculations isn't really the point. It is basically a flow of payments. It's 9% on earnings above 21,000. It's very simple. And I have not had, I think, post the Blair reforms, I say this, I don't think there's any other elected politician in the room, all I can say is I have had a lot of controversy about HE in various forms. In all my time as a constituency MP, I cannot recall a graduate ever coming to see me to complain about the burden of graduate repayments. Of all the host of issues I've dealt with as a constituency, I've never had a single case where someone has said, I'm in work, and Mr. Willetts, it's outrageous, I have this 9% of my earnings, about 21,000, it's pushing me under. Nobody's come to me and said, I'm on the medium earnings, £26,000, but this £41 a month graduate repayment, I just can't manage it. So my view is that is not where the problem lies. There are other challenges we need to tackle to improve social mobility. We've actually got a progressive and fair way of financing higher education.
Can I just ask a follow-up to that? The interest rate now is 3% over RPI, which is running at 6.5% a year. If you had RPI, it's about 3.5 plus 3%. That's quite a high rate of interest on a loan. I know it's contingent. And what's happening, of course, is that people like me just pay it off for their kids. And so, the well-off kids...
That's correct.
So you don't have any means test. You see, your view is that 18, everyone's in the same boat. I disagree with that. I think parents who can afford it should be paying for their kids to go to university in a bigger way than kids from council estates. And That's what happens in America. It doesn't happen here. It's a totally different event.
Because we have a universal scheme, which America doesn't have. If you have an expensive individual university scheme, you then need means tests and support to help the people who
Well,
can't
you
afford
mean
them.
to
We're
test the
using our
maintenance
endowments.
grant already, so
Yeah.
anyway, so you want to take the second question, David, sorry. What was that?
Well, that was Penny saying thank you for the chart. Which,
Right.
Thank you, Penny.
We've got another question?
Hugh Rimmer, Pickard
Oh, right.
University. David, I wonder if you could comment on the parts of the country where there isn't a decent widening participation offer for students. Because of the way in which widening participation services are offered through universities, they tend to offer often very good services to people within their local community. But if, as I recently found out visiting Barnsley, you don't have a nearby higher education institution that's going to offer a good WP service, to be honest, there's absolutely nothing for you. Is there a better way to organise nationally the distribution of WP services so that there aren't young people who miss out simply because of where they're born?
That is a challenge that I recognise, and I accept that. I think what we've got now is more money than ever before going into these services through the access agreements, and a host of initiatives. But that we can do more to ensure that, there are some schools, to put it very crudely, there are some disadvantaged schools which may have 2 or 3 universities all turning up, and others where they need to have a university linking into them, and that's not yet happening. So that is a challenge we need to rise to. I accept that.
You've got time for another one?
Yeah, and then I must go at 1:45, I'm afraid.
One more question then at the 1:45, maybe take 2. Tessa, was that you? Yeah.
Good morning, Tessa Stone from Brightside. There was quite a lot of discussion, David, yesterday about the life cycle approach and student outcomes, and you yourself this morning have picked up on Uprich's statistics looking at differential outcomes for graduates. There was also a little bit of discussion, but not quite enough yesterday, about how, if universities are, as they should, increasingly going to have to look to student outcomes as another very important element of student success, this funding pot, which is going into WP at the moment, is stretched, elongated. Where's the money going to come from, and where is the how are we going to incentivise universities to look at that element of work in the same way that we've incentivised them to look at widening participation?
Well, this was one of the other things I wanted to make clear in my speech, and where I don't think there is, and I think we can do more just to communicate what is available, and that's what I will be discussing with Les. It is a legitimate use of access money to spend it on helping graduates from low-income backgrounds to secure the same kind of employment outcomes as graduates from other backgrounds. And we have a bigger pot in total, and in a time when public spending is being reduced, what we now have through access funding is somewhere above £700 million available for a range of programmes, including those sorts of programmes. Now, people will always ask for more, but my view is that to have been able to increase total spend on access, paid for, indeed, partly out of the higher fees, is a big prize. And one of the other challenges is to those who wish to lower fees down to 6,000, say, not only does that not change the graduate repayment formula, but they have to explain how you pay for access in the absence of the resources going into universities which come out of the fees high above 6. I'm afraid...
One more question, or you want
very briefly, very briefly.
One more. Last question. Here you go. Mike.
Mike Nicholson, University of Oxford. I'm delighted at your discussion about graduate access and graduate access issues. Did I kind of misread what you were saying in that you are looking at the possibility of a graduate loan scheme?
Well, I don't think at the moment, a graduate loan scheme is on the cards. There is an EU initiative, which I am rather keen on, of a master's loan scheme at the EU level. So there is something we can do here. But I was making a kind of politicians' debating point, which is that where you see the problems on access are not where we have a fee and graduate repayment system, but where we don't. And for me, that is the striking contrast. So again, it's why I want the intellectual energy, and the Sutton Trust has got fantastic intellectual energy, trying to argue that graduate repayments is a problem for social mobility is, if I may say so, my view, is not the right battle. It's just not where the evidence does not support that as the problem. The evidence is, how do you deliver affordable further expansion in higher education? What do you do about postgraduate opportunities in master's courses? What do we understand about the missing 3,000? There are lots of interesting research issues. Reopening a view about graduate repayment, which is now being reached by all three political parties when financed by the dilemma of how to finance higher education in an age of austerity. All of us, when confronted with the problem, have essentially reached the same view, which is very close to what Robin subsequently recognised he should have advocated. So my view is we have now got a consensus on this point, and it's not where the problem is.
David, thank you very much for those very thoughtful
Very good.
remarks.
Thank you, Peter. Sorry about that.
Yeah, just give David a big hand.
Thank you. Thanks.